All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube Live and all of our streaming platforms. I'm Jim Spiewak with KUTV2 News, and joining us once again, Nathan Evershed. He is an attorney who is not associated with the Kouri Richins case. Again, if you are just joining us or just getting caught up on this case, a very quick recap. Kouri Richins is the woman who was accused of killing her husband, Eric Richins, with a lethal dose of fentanyl. She is now on trial, and we are into week 3 of this 5-week expected trial. So we are really into the thick of this. I believe the prosecution is getting very close to resting their case. We heard from another key witness today, the lead investigator in the case. So Nathan, thanks again for joining us, and I'll toss things over to you. What was your sort of big takeaway from today at trial?
Yes, it looks like it took them a full day to kind of sort out how they're going to handle this last witness. One of their key witnesses was, of course, the housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, and then the big witness that they would end with would be their lead detective, which is often what a prosecution team does, is to end with a lead investigator, and that's what they did.
I wanted to ask about that. So that's part of the strategy, do you think, is leading with this lead detective, this lead investigator on the case? Again, this is someone that didn't start out as the lead investigator on the case. He did come on a little bit later, but again, the lead investigator as we sit here today, is that a strategy by the prosecution? And if so, why?
Yes, I mean, it comes down to fundamental human psychology. I mean, we remember primacy, which is like the first thing we kind of encounter with someone, and then recency, which would be like the last thing that we encounter with someone. And so in this case, where there's so many things that the prosecution is trying to point towards Ms. Richins, the lead investigator is the person that would introduce that evidence, such as a journal, which was noted here today, such as phone calls, which was noted here today, text messages that she sent to her mom and to her brother, and then also a letter called the Walk the Dog letter. So it's kind of like the big, I guess, the big final signal that the prosecution is wanting to send to the jury that, look, we're ending on a really with a really big exclamation point of this is how we prove our case.
Yeah, again, we've talked about every day the story arc that the prosecution is trying to build for the jury. And you also mentioned a lot of the evidence that this lead investigator had over the case. And one of the first things that prosecutors brought up was this children's book that Kouri Richins authored. This was after her husband, Eric Richins, had died. And this children's book was about how you handle grief after the loss of a parent. And I thought it was interesting that the prosecution put up email exchanges between Kouri and a local media outlet because she went on a local media outlet to market her book. And then there was also some text messages that showed that Kouri said that she made about $5 on the sale of every book, and it was her goal to sell eventually 100,000 copies. And I thought to myself, why would the prosecution put this out there? And I guess my question to you is, was the goal by the prosecution of showing all this to try to show to the jury that Kouri was trying to profit off of Eric's death?
Partially, yes. And then I think they're also trying to establish through everything else that they put forward is that she's manipulative and conniving, that she's trying to profit off of this death. And she put together a book, which most people don't after, of course, their spouse tragically dies. And then she put together journal pages. She put together, kind of like notes on these things and whatnot. So what they're trying to do is trying to paint a picture of that she's conniving, that she's manipulative, and that she's trying to gain some kind of like financial reward from all of this.
And then we get into more of sort of the weeds of this testimony with Detective Driscoll, again, this lead investigator on the case. And he said that one of the first things that he looked into when he picked up the case were call logs from Kouri and Eric. And he said he noticed that there was a high frequency of calls between Kouri, or messages or exchanges between Kouri and the former housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, who has already testified again today. We've heard from her a lot. She again is the one that was alleged to have purchased the drugs from another drug dealer and then supplied them to Kouri at Kouri's request. And so this investigator found a high frequency of messages between Kouri and Carmen. And so when they started to look into Carmen and her exchanges with other people, the investigator said that he came across another person, Nick Bonsavage, who Carmen had communicated with. And they were both known to be in drug court together. They were known to be friends. And so the investigator wanted to look into this Nick Bonsavage and who he was talking to. And he said that that led him to some jail calls between this Nick Bonsavage and an inmate at the Gunnison State Prison. And that brings up our first piece of sound that I'd like to play here. So let's go ahead as I pull that up, and we will let you listen to that. If I can share this here real quick. Here we go. All right, let's take a listen.
We started listening to those phone calls because they're all recorded. And we found an instance where Mr. Bonsavage was speaking to an inmate on the phone, and they were discussing getting an Xbox controller for the inmate. And he said, either you buy it or have Carmen buy it and I'll pay you back. Nick said something to the effect of, no, I can't have Carmen do it. I just tried to give her money the other day, and she told me that she had just made a bunch of money selling illicit street drugs. So that obviously, and that phone call took place on March 4th, the day that Eric died. So that gave us more reason to look into Carmen Lauber.
Your takeaway from that testimony?
They're trying to give credibility and corroboration to Ms. Lauber's testimony by saying that here she is on a jail call, or here another person is on a jail call that had talked with her, that right around the time of Eric Richins' death, she's stating that she just made a lot of money selling illicit street drugs. So you add that call and that conversation to the cell tower records and the cell phone records and the text message exchanges between Ms. Richins and Ms. Lauber. And what they're doing is trying to boast the credibility of Ms. Lauber. And that's exactly what the opposite of what the defense is wanting to have happen.
It seems like there's several points of corroboration. And are there sometimes cases where you might not have these multiple points? And so is that what the prosecution is trying to do, to just continue to build that up?
Yes, I think they're trying to present an overwhelming case of corroboration that you can trust Ms. Lauber. And this is where it ties back to what we were talking about before, is that they're also trying to paint a narrative that Ms. Richins is conniving or manipulative. And that's what they're trying to do, is build corroborating evidence of, look at this book, look at this journal, look at this letter, look at these things. She's directing a bunch of this stuff. And so they're trying to paint that picture as well.
All right, then we get right into the walk the dog letter. This is something that the jury had not seen before today. I'm holding up a copy of the walk the dog letter. It's a handwritten letter, allegedly by Kouri Richins, that investigators eventually got their hands on. What prosecutors are alleging in this letter, if you've not heard of this walk the dog letter, is essentially Kouri instructed. It was written to her mother. Kouri wrote this to her mother, allegedly, and it lays out what look like instructions to give to a possible witness in this case. So I guess my initial question to you before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this, Nathan, is this letter a confession not to murder, but to Kouri knowing she needed a story, and this is her trying to build one, trying to coach witnesses? Is that what the prosecution is laying out by introducing this walk the dog letter?
Yes, this is like manna from heaven for the prosecution. And it came out of nowhere. Apparently, after she was arrested and she was charged with murder, apparently they located this in her jail cell. That evidence did come in to jury trial today, that it was in a jail cell. But that's where it came from. And in a case where they're trying to show that she's conniving, manipulative, trying to direct how this whole thing should go, here comes this letter that allegedly it kind of points towards that narrative quite strongly, essentially saying, tell this witness to say this about Mexico and how Eric had a problem with fentanyl and all of this stuff. It is enormously damaging to the defense. They did their best that they could do to kind of downplay this as much as they could. But I'm sure when her attorneys initially heard about this, they were just gobsmacked. Like, why would we ever have to deal with this now? Because it really feeds the narrative and the theory of the prosecution.
So I'm not going to read it because it's 6 pages long, but I do want to just lay it out there so that the people watching have some context. So I'm going to start from where they were able to start in court, because part of it in court was redacted. So I'm going to read a little bit of it just to give you the sense of what's going on here. And then we're going to hear from the detective who sort of reads the last part of this letter. So this letter, again, written by Kouri, handwritten, is alleging to give instructions about a possible meetup that Eric and one of his friends by the name of Ronnie had before Eric's passing. They were watching a football game, and during that conversation, Eric had mentioned to Ronnie that he would go to Mexico, that he would buy pain pills, and that he would buy fentanyl. And Kouri wanted to try to get Ronnie to make sure that that story was going to play out. So here's from the letter. Here is what I'm thinking, but you have to talk to Ronnie. He would probably have to testify this, but it's super short, not a lot to it. He will need to tell Sky, who was Kouri's attorney at the time, at the meeting next week. So that's a little bit of context about what's going on here. And then let me pull up what the investigator said at the end. So let's go ahead and listen to this now.
Reword this however he needs to make the point. Just include it all. The connection has to be made with Mexico and drugs. Ronnie will have the messages to prove Eric confided in him about getting high. It can be short and to the point, but has to be done. Upon information and belief, LOL. They never found pain pills or fentanyl in my house because he hid it in allergy bottle in work truck. And Cody emptied out work truck within a week, so they were never found. When you talk to Ronnie about this, meet up with him in person. I worry sometimes your house and phone are bugged. Maybe drive down to SL and meet him after work without Bree. Tell Ronnie don't overanalyze it. It was a quick 2-minute conversation, LOL. Tell him I need him to do this. Bring me home and then we will get those damn bitches. Also, please text Lotto or call. Tell him do not text me anything about us doing things together ever, like church, skiing, trips, nothing that puts us together. It doesn't look good. We're so close to the end, let's push through. Have the conversation with Ronnie before he meets with Sky. Then tell him to tell Sky at the meeting about the conversation. Hang in there, we're almost there, love you to the moon. Take vague notes of all this so you remember before you walk the dog.
Your thoughts?
It's just enormously damaging, Jim. There's no way that you can really rehabilitate that letter. I thought Ms. Lewis actually did a good job of highlighting some points of the investigation that didn't follow through on some of these things in the letter. But in a world where the prosecution from day one, after deciding to charge Ms. Richins with surreptitiously and maliciously, with great premeditation and forethought, and in a way that was quite conniving and in a way that was quite manipulative and wrong, to have a letter like this come down and drop into their laps that apparently she wrote and that they found is just incredible for the prosecution, because it feeds into everything that they're trying the jury to believe. And I thought I would just say this wasn't brought up in the opening statement of the state's case. It's like a little Easter egg that they've just kind of subtly just now opened up for the jury, just to kind of have this juicy treat at the end of their case, and you would understand why. And so the jury didn't hear about an opening statement. They didn't know anything about it. And now here comes this letter, and it'll be really interesting to see how they would feel about it.
If you're the prosecution, is your strategy here, if you had any doubt before today, now you really can't have any doubt if you're the prosecution?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's literally, it's hard to imagine better evidence coming into their possession after someone has been charged with murder, in terms of their theory, because you're trying to paint this motive and you're trying to paint this character as to who this person is, which is no easy thing. It's really tough. But then this thing comes along, and it's enormously powerful for them. Not perfect, because there's some holes in it, of course, but enormously powerful.
Yeah, so let's talk about cross-examination. Do you feel like, maybe, and we can start with this walk the dog letter. I do have some sound, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on just how the defense played their cross-examination
Yeah.
of this letter. So let me go ahead and cue up how the defense team handled this. And here we go.
Just last little thing on the walk the dog letter, and then I swear I'll quit beating a dead horse. But the walk the dog letter, to your knowledge, was the walk the dog letter ever delivered to Kouri's mom, to her brother, to the lawyer, to anybody?
I don't believe so, not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so they hit him on other points as well, but that was sort of the last thing that they said is, okay, maybe this letter was written, but did it ever get to its final destination? He said no. Just your takeaway to how they handled Cross on the walk the dog letter.
I thought they did the best they could. I mean, they were able to answer good questions about, well, tell us about Ronnie. What kind of investigation was in there? Did you get Ronnie's phone, for example, which apparently they didn't. Did you follow up with a search warrant on his person or things of that nature? And so they went through aspects of the investigation they felt like should have been followed up with the walk the dog letter that wasn't. And so which is good arguments to make. But in a world where you can have that letter come into trial or not, as a defense attorney, you're doing everything you can not to. And unfortunately, that letter's in, and it's there for the jury to consider for everyone.
And it seems like the defense was being a little bit more technical in some of their cross, to your points that you were just making right there. So is there a dichotomy between the picture that the prosecution paints with this letter versus some of the technical aspects that the defense is getting on cross-examination? And do juries buy into that?
Yeah. So the prosecution, as mentioned, they're going to argue that this letter speaks for itself. She's telling Ronnie
because there really weren't many
say.
questions asked about it. It was just
Correct.
He read it and that was it.
Correct. So eventually the prosecutor, though, at closing argument is going to really point all of this out. But what the defense's theory has been, at least one of their theories, has been, well, this wasn't as investigated as it should have been. And there are some aspects that lead to reasonable doubt that should this person have been interviewed, or should this thing have been located, or something like that, that the jury would have a clear understanding. But they don't have that because this wasn't investigated the way that it should be. At least that's going to be the defense's theory. So they're trying to add to their theory and to their narrative in the best way that they can.
And one of the other things that I thought was very interesting by the defense during cross-examination of the lead investigator, Detective Driscoll, was, did he plant some seeds into the minds of the witnesses, specifically around the word fentanyl? So I'm going to go ahead and play that piece of sound. This is the last piece of sound that I'm going to cue up here, and take a listen to this.
The first people that ever injected the word fentanyl into any conversation with Carmen Lauber were you and the other investigating officers, correct? Came out of y'all's mouth first, not hers.
Objection, Your Honor, argument.
Overruled. If you understand what she's referring to by y'all, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I did it
I'm
again.
still focused on the previous question because I thought there was going to be a follow-up question about
No.
my impression.
No. So the first people that mentioned fentanyl in the interview were law enforcement, not Ms. Lauber, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so they just basically, the defense got the witness to say, yeah, we were the first ones to say fentanyl. Why is that important?
Oh, because it really goes to their theory that Carmen Lauber is not credible, according to the defense, that she's just doing all of this and feeding the state what the state wants to hear, just so she can get out of just horrible consequences that she would otherwise face, felony convictions, possibly going to prison. And so the defense is painting the picture that you're feeding her information that you want her to regurgitate back to you, such as fentanyl. And so you're leading her down this primrose path to gather evidence, but you're the one that's directing her. And so it's kind of interesting how everyone's kind of pointing fingers at people that are directing all of this. The state's saying Kouri Richins is trying to direct a bunch of this stuff and direct other witnesses, and now the defense is saying, well, it's actually the investigators of the state that are directing Ms. Lauber to do different things. Critically, though, what they're trying to do and what they have been trying to do this entire trial, and they've been doing quite a superb job, I think, on it, is really focusing on Carmen Lauber, because in my mind, she's the most critical witness for the state. If the jury believes Carmen Lauber, then it's toast. I mean, for Ms. Richins. But if they don't believe her, then it's going to be a much more of an uphill climb. So they're really going after that interview, her credibility, why she might be tainted, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and the jury also did hear that Carmen was testifying because she was granted immunity for other charges that she was facing, drug-related charges, a weapons charge as well. She's a felony, not allowed to have a weapon. A weapon was found at her home during one of the searches of her home. So, all right, anything else that really stood out to you? It's our understanding that they're going to come back tomorrow at 8:30. Detective Driscoll is going to finish up, and then I believe the prosecution is expected to rest its case. So we'll probably be done hearing from the prosecution tomorrow. So if that is the case, sort of what's your overall takeaway from today? Anything else from today that stood out to you?
I would just say that it's really interesting, not being in that jury room, in that courtroom. It's really interesting to see what the jury would take away from a bunch of this evidence that's come. Like, how much weight are they giving to these text messages, to these phone call recordings, to these letters, to this journal entry, to all of these things. I mean, you and I can pontificate, and I have my own opinions about how a lot of this works. But it'd be really interesting to see how the jury would look at this. But there's no doubt the state has a ton of evidence, and they've really kind of closed out their case strong with the evidence that they have as well. And eventually, this will be in the jury's hands. I'm guessing, Jim. I think this will probably wrap up next week.
Yeah, so if the prosecution does in fact rest tomorrow, I believe according to the docket, there's nothing scheduled for Friday. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, the defense will have their chance to pick up. I guess the big question is, and we don't know, will Kouri Richins take the stand? She does have the right to not take the stand. Any thoughts on that, just based on how we've seen this play out, or is that an individual decision? Can it sometimes come down to a last second, okay, we're going to put you on, or do clients usually know and attorneys usually know going into a trial, we're not putting you on the stand at all, period, no matter what?
Both. I've had cases where, as the case unfolds, we make the decision. It's probably best for you not to take the stand, and once in a while, it's been great for the client to take the stand. Based off of my experience, I think what will likely happen is that she will not testify. And that's the general rule of thumb in these kinds of cases. There's just way too much there for the prosecution to explore, and I think that the defense is already making their arguments. But she could testify. I'd be quite surprised if she did, though.
Yeah, I guess we will see. To be determined. So, Nathan, thank you again, as always, for spending some extra time with us. Really interesting insight and context around all of this. So for everyone watching, if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube page, please go ahead and give us a liking, and you can follow along. We will be here every day after the trial. And so, Nathan, thank you again for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.